Alberta's oil patch is sitting in the crosshairs of Donald Trump's tariff threats. Some think it's just talk from the president-elect, while some like Premier Danielle Smith, after her visit to Mar-a-Lago, say this is serious. But what are Alberta's oil and gas companies doing and expecting if these threats come to fruition? And what will it mean for the province's finances? Canadian premiers and the Prime Minister met in Ottawa to strategize.
There's never been a time that's more important for Canadians to be united, to stand up, and making sure that our voice is heard. Retaliatory tariffs need to be hard.
Their plan to wait and see what happens and react accordingly.
We have made it very clear that everything is on the table as potential responses, but we've also been very, very clear it has to be fair across the country.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith isn't ready to commit to the Team Canada approach. She released a statement that says federal government officials continue to publicly and privately float the idea of cutting off energy supply to the U.S. and imposing export tariffs on Alberta energy and other products to the United States. Until these threats cease, Alberta will not be able to fully support the federal government's plan in dealing with the threatened tariffs. That's the politics. Meanwhile, in the oil patch, some Canadian oil producers have their own plans. 5 major players formed a joint working group to support cross-Canada efforts to prevent tariffs from being placed on Canadian oil and natural gas exported to the United States, while also preparing to mitigate impacts in the event those tariffs become a reality. Some producers have begun hedging their risks, which involves signing contracts to lock in the price of oil for months at a time or even the entire year.
I believe some of them are trying to hedge their risks of this tariff coming on. There's a contract called Western Canadian Select, which producers here hedge and basically secure their price in advance. And a couple of weeks ago, people were saying that it seems like the volumes have gone up. So, in response to the risk, I think people were trying to protect themselves from this happening.
So for the energy industry right now, we're still moving ahead with business like we'd originally planned. And as soon as we know more, we'll ensure that we mitigate as much risk as we possibly can.
The risk depends on how these tariff threats materialize. If 25% tariffs are imposed across all of Canada's goods.
I do think we're going to see a reduction in demand for our crude oil in this scenario. And because we don't have alternative markets, we have very few outlets, that's going to potentially result in building inventories here in Western Canada and lower prices for Canadian crude oil.
Lower prices for Canadian crude oil can impact jobs, inflation, and even hit government coffers. Canada exports about 4 million barrels of oil to the U.S. per day. Alberta sends a lot to the Midwest markets, where refineries turn it into a desirable end product, fuel. Canada and the United States have, over the years, built an integrated system. Refineries in the Midwest have tailored their operations to our heavy crude oil.
And so they don't have pipelines to bring in alternative sources of supply. They're very dependent upon us. So if this tariff goes in, somebody's going to have to pay it. At current prices, it'd be about $16 a barrel, which is a big number. And so part of that would flow through to the refiners through lower margins. Some would be higher gasoline, diesel, and jet prices for consumers, especially in the Midwest. And some of it would get shifted back to the producers through a wider differential.
Canada's heavy crude usually trades at a discount because of refining and transportation costs. So a price gap between West Texas Intermediate, WTI, which is the North American benchmark price, and Alberta's Western Canadian Select, WCS, is normal. But the wider that differential is, the more Alberta's oil is selling for a discount. And that deeper discount means less profit for Alberta-based companies and the provincial government.
But every dollar that Western Canada Select is sold at a discount costs our treasury.
What's next? That's anyone's guess. Nothing will be clear until after Trump's inauguration. Smith says she plans to be there and will travel to the U.S. several times in the coming months to make the case against tariffs on Canadian products. Helen Pike, CBC News, Calgary.